Dum, dum, dum. We're back again. Hang on. Where are we? There we are.
I just
The
dancing with
dancing
Dash,
clowns.
like I do. Yes,
That's
I
us.
dance with Dash every intro and outro music just because it's fun. Why not? It's good, peppy music. Come on, yeah.
I've actually heard from the person who actually made that original sound for us that they're going to make us a new up the beat one, more modernize it. So that would be nice.
How could it get any better than that, though? That is such classic now. Come on.
I don't know. Right. Yes. So let's get straight into our little slides here and kind of get through. Right. So.
Yep.
Randall, do's and don'ts.
You're gonna make me do this because I'm the number 2 guy today, huh?
Let's
All right. So just a few do's and don'ts. Pretty obvious. Pretty common sense. Be nice. Be nice to people in the chat and be nice to us. You know, we're volunteers. We're doing this because we want to. Don't post anything that's adult or rude or offensive. No advertising or promoting anything in the chat. Now, we can do whatever we want. It's our show. But in the chat, please, you do not get to promote anything. This is not your platform. This is ours. Do not post the same thing again and again. I have the ability to mute you. You do not want to be in that position. Also, if you ask a question again, then I take you out of the queue from the beginning and put you in later. You just lost your place. So just ask your questions once. Yes, I have seen them. Yes, it will get in our answer queue, just like they always do. Do not harass anybody. We do not take that lightly. We take that very seriously. But above all, have a good time. We're having fun doing this show. We want you to have fun in the chat, chatting with each other and asking us questions. That's the whole point of this show. Simon, that work for you?
Yeah, that's perfect. So it's like you've done it all before.
Some of it, yes.
Quick introductions. So, my name is Simon Lightfoot, Flutter Community Leader and CTO at Dave Edwards London. And you can find me on Twitter at Dave Edwards London. And Scott can't be with us. I'm afraid he's under the weather today. So, Randall, you're stepping in. Randall.
I'm the number 2. Yes, I'm Randall Schwartz. I'm a Dart and Flutter Google developer expert, which means I'm one of the 12 people in the U.S. that have that title. So it's a pretty rare and privileged occasion. It means I answer a lot of questions all the time for people, including on this show, but I also answer on Discord, Stack Overflow, Reddit, Slack, all sorts of great places to get answers from me. For this show, I'm also the question magician, which means I am watching the chat room, looking for your questions that start with Q colon. If you put a Q in front of it, I put it in the queue. Oh, bad pun already in the show. All right, so just be sure to do that. Otherwise, we presume that you're chatting amongst yourselves, which you do, people do from time to time. But if you want to ask us, put it in the queue. All right.
And we're joined today by a few different people. So first of all, Danielle from the community. Hello, Danielle. Welcome.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, I'm Danielle Cox. I lead a small team of Flutter developers. We work on Flutter Web here in the U.S. And I'm not a GDE yet. I would love to be one. I'm going to work toward that, but I have not earned it yet. So it's right that I'm not one, but I'd like to get there. And and so I'm also one of the co-organizers of the Flutteristas, which is we're basically an international organization of women and non-binary folk that have a passion, that share a passion for Flutter.
Cool.
Which is awesome. And we've also got a couple of guests from @Company. So let's introduce them. Colin, welcome to the stage. Hey, Colin.
Hey, Simon.
Yeah.
Good to be here again.
And Chris, there we go.
Hey, Simon.
It's the right round. There we go. So everyone's here. This is easier. We just get everyone on the screen, so everyone, I hear you guys have been doing stuff with IoT. I want to know all about it.
We've been doing a huge amount of work with IoT, and what that's led to is a whole bunch of things in Dart, giving live feeds and alarms and what have you in the Dart world to Flutter front ends, so you can actually see live information of IoT things. And we've got some things we can probably show you later on. But it's been a lot of fun, sort of crossing the world of IoT, where there's sort of live information you want to monitor or send alarms to, or have time series data. How do you get that out of a device using Dart? So I've been testing a lot of hardware recently, as has Chris, with Dart and other interfaces, either talk to our protocol directly or running Dart on very, very weird bits of equipment. So I allegedly, according to the Dart team, was the first person ever to run Dart on this particular bit of hardware. Let me I 3D printed the case, but this is there you go. That is there.
What SBC is that?
RISC-V processor.
Oh, yeah, the RISC-V. What's it? Star
yeah,
Sci-Fi. Yeah,
exactly. Awesome. So Dart. The first thing I ran on that was Dart, and it worked perfectly. So congrats to the Dart team for getting that.
I was going to ask you about RISC-V because I get a bit of feedback, but I can. Yeah, I've got a ton of RISC-V.
Yeah.
Various boards.
This is the one I started with. Little
look, match.
Oh, twins! It's a lot of fun.
RISC-V another time, didn't we, Simon? And at the time, we thought RISC-V was in beta because it was appearing in the beta channel on the SDK download page. But in fact, it had accidentally got there by something being mistagged. So it's still really in the dev channel. And we're waiting for everything to mature to kind of come to beta. And so a presentation I'm sort of working on at the moment is all about RISC-V and kind of when it's going to happen with Dart and Flutter and what it's going to take in the industry to sort of be the pieces that need to shift into place. Because if you try and do stuff with Dart on RISC-V at the moment, you've got a lot of yak shaving to do because there's a whole bunch of dependencies just don't exist or need to be pulled in from weird places or whatever else. And I think we're in that kind of classic thing of hardware people are waiting for software people and software people are waiting for hardware to be available. And it's going to take a few iterations on that before everything settles down.
I was very pleased it was there. It's a lot of fun. I've been running in a QEMU RISC-V, as Chris knows, for a while. So to actually run on real hardware it's real hardware, and it still works. So yeah. And
then you realise it's a bit slower than you thought it was going to be.
It was not too bad. I mean that.
No, I just mean like when you're used to like a QEMU on like a beefy, like multi-core desktop machine.
It was pretty. Right, it's a beefy beefy desktop, but I mean it ran. It worked fine. But it's nice to be running on hardware.
Oh, for sure. I mean, there is that. It's always been that way with. So I relate this to mobile phone apps because when you first did mobile phone apps, you would have to you'd build them on the emulator because to run them on the real device would be just so slow. You just couldn't develop and like re-upload. It'd take you like a cycle of like half an hour just to kind of get something to build and then get on the device to run it, right? Like you'd always have to build against emulators. It's definitely a different experience when you run it on device. I was actually going to mention something I saw in the news this week, which I'll pop up on the screen here, is this. Did you guys hear about this?
I did.
Asus have pulled out their Tinkerboard and switched from ARM to RISC-V. So this is kind of interesting. So this is a little single board computer that's been around since 2017, but now has gone from various ARM to a 64-bit RISC-V. So this is kind of an interesting idea. I don't know much about the actual core itself that they're running. RZ5 chip, is it Renesas? So I don't know, 1 gigahertz. There's nothing to scuff about, right? That's pretty good.
Yeah, I know. I'm sure we'll be playing with them at some point. Chris has probably got his order in already.
Well, I've got one of the original Tinkerboards, and I think that was an example of the problem that you can have with dependencies, especially when there's not a large community around something. So Raspberry Pi has been, I think, so successful in part because of the huge community. And so a lot of people have kind of converged their efforts on that. Whereas the Tinkerboard, when it came along, there was one sort of broken OS distro that ran on it. And there wasn't a community then kind of maintaining that and bringing things for it. So it was really difficult to get traction. But I think with RISC-V, it's all a little bit different in that there's an open source hardware community has already kind of gelled around lots of things happening in RISC-V. But there's kind of a split as well. So I saw somebody the other day saying, hey, I could probably run Dart on my soldering iron. And there's a thing called the PineSil out there. And they describe it as having a system on chip, but it's really an MCU. So RISC-V kind of shows, like ARM does, RISC-V shows up in microcontrollers and sort of full-fledged system on chips. And
it's something to just mention here, that the difference between like a microprocessor versus an MCU, right? Like an MCU microcontroller is really just, like on the very low end, very low scale. So this is like microchip, Atmel. These are kind of like what was in the original Arduinos, right? The Atmel 168. Like these are microcontrollers, right? These are tiny little things. They've got on board like 2 kilobytes if you're lucky of RAM, right? Like these are tiny little things. Whereas there's a point, I don't know where would you say the switch occurs to?
I talk about the cut across between a SoC and an MCU as being, can it run Linux or not? And actually that's a really useful one for us with Dart, because we need something to dynamically bind to, and that's normally libc at the very minimum, or the equivalents in Windows and Mac OS. Otherwise you can't run Dart. And that's why we can't get Dart onto a microcontroller device, because nobody's done the stuff yet to use dynamic bindings to what you might find in a real-time operating system in those environments. So, and even then, you'd need a big microcontroller like a Pico W or something. So, and this device I waved earlier, that's something I've been working on for the past few months, and we've got that now sending messages into @Talk application that Colin did, and
I'm gonna have to say
that's
this,
ESP32, and so pretty constrained. But actually, it's got Wi-Fi, it's got hundreds of Ks of memory, and so you can do a lot with it.
I've really got have you guys heard of the Buffalo 808? It's a new RISC-V. Okay, so I can, let me see if I can share this. So it's what I'm working with at the moment. It's one of the dev kits I've got here. They've got Linux running on this. Pine, the company that did the PineSil we're just talking about, they offer a little dev kit board, which is this. It's the OX64. The Buffalo. It's not really Buffalo, is it? Buffalo. Buffalo Labs 808 runs the C906 core.
Nice.
That's on a few other products. Like they think the D1 runs C906 cores. They're all in a D1. But it actually has 3 cores. It's got 64-bit RISC-V and 2 32-bit cores as well. And there's the interesting point. It's got embedded 64 megabytes of RAM.
Look at that.
And built-in Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and Zigbee.
Yep.
And broadband friendly, blah 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 blah, and USB 2. So this is all inbuilt into the one system on chip. And there's actually the interesting point here. It actually has H.264 video codec and a bunch of other stuff all built in. And it actually has a what were they calling it? They call it AI NPU. Neural processing unit, but basically it will actually run TensorFlow like models straight on the chip as well, alongside, all built into this premise, and you can run Linux on this. It's got Linux running on it, so it's actually like it's that tier of not as small as like the really low end microcontroller. It is a system on chip and it runs Linux, but it's still not like the Sci-Fi, which is like 512 meg, or the Mango Pi, which is like 512 megabytes of RAM, huge amount of flash and all the rest of it. But You connect an SD card to this, and you've got quite a lot of storage, a reasonable amount of memory for an embedded system. 64 meg is plenty good enough to do a lot of things. And you can definitely run Linux and Dart, and the Linux kernel doesn't take up that much of that if you strip it out.
Yeah, that's kind of similar to the socks that we generally find in routers running things like OpenWRT. And you can get a useful minimal Linux going in those environments.
Yeah, so 480 megahertz primary, 320 megahertz secondary, and then 150 megahertz tertiary cores with different levels of various compatibility. But just what it's got available. You can access 16 meg. This got actually, I think, 16 megabytes of flash on it as well. But it's pretty damn cool. And it's also got one of the reasons we chose it is because it's got support for DSI displays.
Mm-hmm.
So we can actually hook this to have it directly drive the DSI interface for the display, but also supports CSI camera interface as well, which is kind of cool. So the first version of this I've got a face detection algorithm working in TensorFlow Lite, detecting off the camera on the device and displaying the result with a square box around someone's face at roughly 20 FPS. I think it's pretty impressive for the device, right?
Yeah.
So, but
I think that's what we're going to see is people having to make a decision. Actually, we were speaking to somebody just a couple of weeks ago. They're having to make a decision: is it going to be MCU or is it going to be Linux kernel, and what hardware we're going to use? And then it really comes down to battery life. So I don't know what the battery life is on that device you've got in front of you there, Chris, but it's probably quite a long battery life. Whereas if it was a Linux, maybe it wouldn't be. But that's essentially, I think, the decision seems to be battery life. But do you agree, Chris?
Yeah, it is. And that device I was waving around, it really depends on how much you're using the radios, because the radios sap the battery pretty quickly. Yeah. Just like with your mobile phone. And so, that battery can go for days if you're using the radios kind of sparsely, whereas it's kind of a working day if you're constantly connected, constantly sending data backwards and forwards.
Yep. And so I did an IoT product before, which was sampling sensor data at timed intervals and then transmitting that. And it's always that was over RF between points, and then Wi-Fi after that. But there's always the signal that transmit the signal that consumes the battery, but also just taking your system on chip down to a low power state. So just like, as long as you kind of hook that up, even if it runs Linux, right? As long as it's hooked up to the Linux kernel correctly, you can just downstate your CPU down to like the lowest possible run level. That is enough to wake it up when it needs to, and then put that on a timer or some interrupt. It really does make a big difference again to lifetime of your batteries. All right, so just a note for anyone that's just coming in and watching, we're talking about IoT and embedded devices. And if you have any questions, not just about this topic, but anything Flutter and Dart related, get it in the chat. And I'm trying to find my button for this. There it is. And make sure you put a Q in front of it. And then our magician behind the scenes, Randall, he'll be able to dig that question out and present that to us. We jumped straight into this, and I realized that we didn't really talk about @sign, and I know, and Anthony, that would be very unhappy that we didn't talk about @sign itself. So which of you want to take that on?
I'll start off, and Chris can fill in the gaps I normally forget. @sign's a company that we started almost 3.5 years ago now. With the idea of giving everybody an identity on the internet. There was a place also to store your own information. So I was very fed up with the fact that every time I went to anywhere, I had to fill in the same information over and over again, like name, address, blah, blah, blah. It gets really old, right? And it would be much nicer if the internet could log into me and I could decide who can have my data. And if I didn't like them anymore, I'd be able to pull it back. So we'd actually had this idea, Kevin and myself, I know 10 years ago, but we couldn't get any of the stuff working because it was just too slow, too clunky. The technology wasn't available. Fast forward to 3.5 years ago, we realized, cell phones are now really powerful. Even IoT devices are really powerful. and they can cut their own cryptographic keys, which means people can own their own data, that's huge. The other thing that happened was in-memory databases are now a thing that can scale vertically and horizontally, so you can have a directory of all of those identities. We now call them @. So the only thing we needed was a new protocol to join those two ideas. So keys at the edge and a directory to look up things, and then everybody could own their own data, share it with other people. And so we started writing the protocol. We found out pretty quickly that people don't like writing protocols and using protocols at a low level. Chris has had to do that recently because he's been working on MCUs. Sorry, Chris. It's tough. So we wrote an SDK. I contacted a buddy of mine who'd been talking about Flutter. It was very in his early stages. This is maybe 5 years ago. And I thought, well, the next project we'll do Dart and Flutter. So we did that just for demonstration, so we could show the tech working. And we've never left. we've been the demos sort of turned into production code. We onboarded a bunch of developers who are actually all Java developers who are very anxious about using Dart and Flutter, and I don't think they turn back now. So it's been we've been very lucky. We chose through just random luck, and we've had a lot of help from this people like yourself, Simon, and people in the community to help us along. And every time we've wanted something new, again, we must be all thinking the same thing, because it just sort of turned out. And the classic example of that one was we were trying to do some debugging. We used TLS for pretty much everything. And if you do a packet trace on TLS, you basically see encrypted traffic. So you can't actually see what's going on. It would be really nice if Dart could dump out the TLS keys, and it can now do that. So you can actually see inside TLS packets and actually decoding and see what's going on the wire. So you can't see our data because we've encrypted it inside the TLS, but at least you can see what's going on. So we just became sort of 100%. So our main SDK is in Dart and Flutter. You'll see us publish all sorts of stuff there. Chris has been doing other languages as well, because he's had to be playing in MCU land. So Chris, I'll hand over you what I missed.
So, and I guess it was about a year ago, we came back from Mobile World Congress and we had this demo of a Raspberry Pi with a heart rate monitor sending stuff into a Flutter app.
I remember.
We were back a year later, and the thing that had changed with that demo is we've now got the private keys being cut inside of a SIM card. And so everything's a lot more secure than it was with private keys in the Linux file system. But I guess if you'd asked a year ago about SDKs, we had one SDK, and I expected by now we'd have about half a dozen, and that's roughly where we are, because Java came not long after, and then recently we've been doing a whole bunch of stuff around C, C++, and MicroPython. So this little thing with an ESP32 inside of it is actually it's kind of a stack of a C firmware and then a MicroPython application developer layer on top of that. And then there's actually a sort of customization framework for the apps that's just JSON. So you can specify the layout of an application on it in just a JSON file. But we've got that now connecting into the servers that are running Dart on the back end and talking our protocol in order to send end-to-end messages that are encrypted all the way from the device to the recipient. And that involves a little bit more messing around in Dart, because we can then use the Dart SDK to just have a sort of proof of concept application or to integrate into back-end systems. And so that's what Colin and I were working on just last week, kind of getting the final piece in place so that we can show how, in this case, we can put a sort of hospital application onto it for porters or nurses or what have you, to put data into systems, but especially in really sensitive privacy regimes like Germany, they want to have control over where that data is going. And so we can do that with the end-to-end encryption. But then when it gets to where it's going, it needs to be able to integrate into a hospital management system or whatever. And that's where the Dart pieces kind of come back out in order to wire that together.
It is one of the nice things. Actually.
If we have some demos for you if you want to see them, Simon. So I know.
Oh yeah, no. Before we jump off, I found, so when I was doing this research for the RISC-V stuff, I found this. Have you guys heard of this? Dartino.
Yes, yeah. I mentioned it to Tim Sneath the other day in a tweet. Like, well, we've been doing all this stuff with RISC-V, but can we talk about going down a level to MCUs? And
this is it. Like, this is where this came from.
Can we bring it back into life? Dartino.
I want this to come out being discontinued. It's those that don't know, it was
now's the time.
It is September 2016. So it was only a year after that. Was it like 2015 when Dart first came out? So this is very early on. But this idea that you can actually run it on like a Arduino style environment, like these kind of MCUs, I really like to see that come back.
Yeah, me too. Now's the time. I don't think the time was back then,
now's
but
the time.
Now's the time. Now's the time.
Rise up with your pitchforks, make it happen. No,
the other thing that might bridge it here is WASM. We've been doing some stuff with Dart and WASM.
Ooh.
And so at the moment, it needs experimental WASM functionality around garbage collection, but that's going to be pushed into the mainstream over the next year or so. Yeah. And I think the other thing that we'll see kind of converge here is we'll get MCUs, or at least MCU layers, that'll be able to run WASM code.
That's what I was literally just thinking. If you've just got that central core that runs WASM code, that's it. You've got the intermediate level code is just WASM, and then that really makes hot reload work as well. Then you can actually really start playing with that. Oh yeah, there's some interest in it.
Yeah, to be able to get Dart code in particular running on microcontrollers will be a game changer. I mean, just an absolute game changer. It's so painful at the moment. It really is painful.
It would be. It's not Turtles all the way down. It'd be Dart all the way down. Then, right?
I'd love it. Yeah, let's do that.
To the metal.
Right.
Yeah. That means you can run literally from the smallest processor ever all the way up to the largest, big cloud data center type server and program the same code. That would be pretty amazing. And it would be less pain for Chris when he's dealing with MCUs, which I felt terrible for Chris, but he did a good job. But we had to speak at the protocol level. He had no SDK.
whenever you start at that kind, whenever you're people, I don't think people realize, like, the lower you go down the system, the longer it takes to develop, the more difficult it is, like the more obscure the issues are, right? Like when you start going, oh, I need to JTAG debug and step through exactly what's going on in this device. It's like, that's not as simple as just like press run and it just magically happens, right? Like,
yeah, that's right. Yeah. I mean, somebody literally sent me a little MCU with a SIM card on it. It goes like, can you get that working by next week? And the answer was no.
Yeah, right. Good luck with that. Right?
Give me some with a Linux kernel. I'll be able to get it working next week, but not MCU. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah, because you find yourself just in dependency hell is worse than dependency hell usually is, because things like encryption libraries are non-existent or don't work.
Or don't use your particular flavor of encryption, right?
I didn't think I was going to be embarking on a journey that took me to rewriting portions of an ASN1 parser, but that's what happened.
All right. Yeah, I know that feeling. I mean, talking about that, like literally, I was looking at this BL808, right? And it's got cores for crypto built into it, right? For doing the various base level stuff. And I was like, great. But I now need to make sure that the system level is using that hardware to enhance the speed, and it's like that's all custom work. That's all stuff that that you really have to go down a multiple levels to get to, right?
Yep.
Anyway,
and some of that stuff can be dangerously fragile. So I was working with something the other day where there was a wrapper around a hardware encryption module, and you could ask it for random numbers, and it returned without exception 0.
Oh.
And so, unless you're checking for that kind of stuff, you can then end up with a whole bunch of your crypto being useless because it's been initialized with zeros rather than proper randomness.
I mean, oh god, I can see that.
That's scary. That is scary.
But even then, the other side of it is when something goes wrong at that level. Sometimes there is no sort of way of returning state, like returning back up and handling it gracefully. No, it is literally like reboot, right? Like you just start again. Like there's literally no option. It's like there's always a point in drivers or at that low level when it's just like there isn't really a way of doing like a graceful restart of this module or this hardware or anything like that. It's a crash. You're crashing on purpose, right? Like,
well, one of the issues we see is around free memory. So the Pico W's got, I think, 192K of RAM, and wrapping a socket in TLS takes 16K.
Yeah,
and it needs to be a contiguous block. And so if the memory is at all fragmented, then you're not getting your secure socket. And the only way back, as you say, is to restart the device.
I mean, you literally end up going down the route of like, do you want to do your own memory manager at that point? Well, it depends on like if you. No, you don't want to do that. But what I mean is like, what was it? So you'd be running like free RealTOS there, right? In that kind of embedded system, right?
So
there's no way with that much RAM you're going to be running anything like substantial.
So you can run MicroPython on that. So that's what we've been.
I still haven't looked into like. I still haven't. So MicroPython's been running on a couple of those devices as well, but I still actually haven't understood how that whole sort of the actual system as a whole works, because I feel like there's something there. Like Python's quite a high level language, and is it cut down at all? Like MicroPython?
Yeah, really cut down, and a very restricted set of packages, and there's a whole bunch of sort of U packages, so you get UJSON instead of JSON, and it's got all of the kind of core functions in there, but if you kind of stray into obscure land, it's not going to be there.
Because I mean that's what we would need, right? For this like Dartino or something like that, we need something which just strips Dart down to being just core and very restricted to get remotely down to the sort of capability that you need to get running on that kind of device, right?
I'd be happy just with Dart.io. That would be great.
A lot you can do with just that.
I actually want to jump back a minute or so and point out when we were talking about how the encryption was getting seeded with 0 and stuff like that.
Oh yes,
those are sometimes the absolute worst bugs because you think it's working.
Yeah.
And so when you think it's working and you don't have a way to tell it's not working, and all of a sudden that bad things happen at that point, and you didn't even know to look.
I just reminded me of another type of bug that you get on that C++ like embedded level, like I've had before, which has just been when things behave differently in the debug release to the release, debug from release. Like when it's just like it works in debug, but when I run it, it doesn't work anymore. And you're like, why?
And you definitely don't want a Heisenberg around your crypto libraries because
no,
of all places, definitely not. Yeah.
Yeah, if it works and you're testing it properly and it's all looking good in one mode, and then it's doing zeros for initialization in another mode, then
yeah. Anyway, so we got some questions lined up, and please, everyone, get your questions in. We're still going to be taking questions. We've been chatting for a while, but this is kind of fun. This is interesting to us. So, apologies. Is there any stuff like? Let's just see if there's anything related to what we're talking about now. Otherwise, we can
definitely do
some demos and then.
Yeah, there's a question back there on the Java developers. It was at 12:30 for Matthew Jones.
Oh yeah. Here we go. You mentioned that you moved a lot of Java developers over to Dart/Flutter. How did you get them started? How did you get them to start composition over inheritance? I struggle with getting a Java team through this.
It was actually pretty easy. The guys were keen to learn new stuff. but they'd never seen Dart or Flutter before at all. So we actually started with Dart, and they ported. I mean, essentially what it was is Kevin and myself had written the original sort of code for our ad server and the ad root server, but it wasn't well architected. It was working code, but there was no way that you could start a new project and keep going for a decade or two on the code base we had. So we needed people that had
enterprise. You're saying it's not
enterprise.
enterprise.
It was not code that we could put into the public domain, put it that way. Yeah. But it was working, and it got the company off. I mean, we knew we needed help, right? So what we really needed was some software architecture in there, and Java developers that we have are really good software architects. I mean, so they looked at what we had and said, we break it into this way. So that's what we inherited from them was the way of developing code that could be built on. So that's what they did, and they learned Dart as they ported. And by the time they ported, they were Dart experts. So that was essentially what happened. And then we were lucky enough to have Gary come join the team, and Chris joined the team. And then it was a case of, okay, we've got code there, but Chris was instrumental in creating pipelines. So everything. I mean, we talk about GitHub Ops. I mean, everything's in GitHub. I mean, everything. That's all down to Chris. And Gary basically brought the discipline around tests. So you talk about those crypto libraries. There's a test for everything. Every single thing that we do, there's tests. I mean, it's typical startup stuff, right? So have scrappy code at the beginning, bring in software architects, then bring DevOps around it, and then test the hell out of everything. And essentially that's what we got. But I mean, Chris, you might want to speak about sort of the DevOps side of things. And I know you were in the Java world for many, many years as well. So what was your journey like?
So one of the first things I noticed as I was kind of getting into some of the code, and this was stuff that had been written by more junior members of the team as we'd brought them on, was that Java anti-patterns are also Dart anti-patterns.
Yeah.
And the worst part of this is people are being taught in school to do things that create lots of garbage. So I spent a lot of my time working with Java on performance and getting banking applications to perform as well as our customers deserved. And what you kind of want to do there is minimize garbage collection. So even when you've got huge servers, or even now, I see people in the Flutter community saying, "Oh, it doesn't matter about garbage collection. You've got an octa-core SOC on your phone, and it'll happily take care of it in the background." And it's kind of, multi-threaded garbage collectors are loads better than it used to be, but there's just kind of patterns of willfully creating garbage that can be avoided.
I had to have said one point of this. I see this all the time, and I had to say it. So as to the developers out there, your app is not the only app that's running on the device, right? Like people, when they develop, they think of my code is the only thing that's running, so they can create. But it's every app. If every app was doing that, the system would grind to a halt, right? Like if every app was just treated like, it'd be chaos, right? So be a good citizen to the other developers that are making that software on the same platform you are, right?
And that means don't do sort of temp var equals blah, and then another thing equals do something to the temp var, and then another thing equals do something to the third one. It's just kind of just kind of get everything into one expression and make it happen, and then you're not leaving behind a trail of discarded objects that the garbage collector is going to have to come and deal with later on. So that was one of the first things that really struck me. And then in terms of pipelines, I think the fun of the last few months has been with securing our pipelines. So we've kind of copied the Dart team in adoption of the open source security foundation scorecards. So the Dart team implemented those sort of middle of last year, and they give people an indication of what you're doing with your project around software supply chain security, making sure everything's properly done. And I'll pass the mic back.
Damn dogs.
Yeah, it's definitely Milo barking at somebody.
The interesting thing about this, right, is that, as you were saying with the tests earlier, right, you really need, like, if you've got a security product, you need to have assurances that your product is performing to a certain standard, right? So that's the
exactly.
critical point.
Yeah,
right?
so Gary's really brought that discipline in more than anybody else, of test upon test upon test, which is great now, because when we do a new release, you run it through every single test, and you're confident if it's gone through the test, it's going to be working just fine. But getting to that stage is, obviously takes time.
It's a gruel.
It really is a gruel. But once you're in the stream of it, then it's good, and it's just discipline, I guess. But it also makes confidence go up, that when you hit the commit and it goes through the test, it's working, then it's working. So that's a joy.
It's also that case that there needs to be a feedback loop, right? So if ever you've got a product out there, you find an issue, you write the tests, not just you fix the bug or whatever it was, but you then write the test for the lots of more tests around how it should not be broken, right? So that you can
absolutely
really harden your test suite.
Yeah, that's right. The other thing we found as we've entered the IoT market really hard is, if you have got a memory leak, it's going to show up pretty damn quickly. And we've got a radio transmitter that we're monitoring with our software. It's sending 500 million messages a month, so that's a lot of messages. So if you're missing a byte every time you do one of those messages, it's going to run out of memory pretty damn quickly. So, and we've got to make sure that all our code can send. That's just one sensor, right? It's just one radio transmitter. If you imagine billions of those going through our code, and it's 500 million messages for a billion sensors, you've got to make sure your code's really tight. So we obviously have challenges in that. We've hit challenges along that road. But the instrumentation, I think, in Dart has been really helpful. So having being able to inspect, see what's actually happening inside the VM is something that's been really useful. So you can actually pinpoint where the hell the memory use is happening. You can track it over time. You can see where the performance problems are. I'm not too sure how many developers use those tools, but
not enough.
I know Chris and I have used them a lot.
Yeah, because we normally compile to AOT binaries, but we actually use VM versions to profile them.
Yeah. I was going to say, like those tools have actually, I think on the master branch they changed. The next release, we're going to see some improvements around the dev tools as well. Like they're always
I'm really looking forward to that. It's going to be give us even more insight.
I think you guys should be submitting. I'm gonna sort of segue off here to something else here briefly. So we actually have a conference coming up. So there's a call for papers. so yeah, anyone watching, I know that if you're involved in Flutter and you think you've got a unique talk, you want to get that out there, go to fluttercon.dev and you can submit that talk. And also the tickets are also available. So go get your tickets now. I think we've got Madness March, I think is on right now. So you get a bunch of discounts. So go grab them while you can. Tickets won't stay cheap forever. And just sort of throw that out there as we're just talking about it. But also, I'd like you guys to submit a talk. I feel like a talk around better debugging of Dart applications. That's a really interesting idea. That not a lot of people know how to use those tools effectively, right? Like they don't understand there are different concepts they show off, like CPU profiling and everything else. That again, for the outsider making from an application developer building an app, they're not coming from that point of view, so they don't really understand what they're seeing in those views. I feel like that's probably an interesting talk. I'm just going to throw it out there, Anyway.
Well, Simon, you might want to share Matthew's comment at 12:42.
Oh, there's another one. Quick. 12:42. Where are we? Oh, no, I've lost it. Hang on. This one. I hope I clicked the wrong one.
Right, and I just realized 12:42 is totally stupid for you, but you get the idea.
Oh yeah, I mean, the problem, like we could talk about embedded like this from an outside perspective, Matthew, and it's really great. I think like diving in and actually debugging something or working with an embedded device, the time it would take, right? It'd have to be very structured and very much rehearsed, I think, if you need to do like a stream array, because
the reason I called this up was actually to support your suggestion that they make a talk out of it, and showing that there's interest in our audience to watch something like that.
Sure.
That's what I wanted to kind of point out.
I feel like the risk, the whole RISC-V announcement, like it was already interesting before, but that kind of made people go, hang on, what's this? What is this? And now people are like going away looking into this and experimenting. But for sure, I mean, the market for like, your mobile phone being an ARM-based processor in sort of like, I don't know where history is going with computers. x86 took over the complete market, right? So that was considered like your hallmark desktop, powerful beast, not embedded, right? And then suddenly ARM came along, and suddenly seeing ARM trickling from all these embedded markets and sort of embedded side getting that sort of market share back. And then I feel like, there was, my personal opinion about this is that when NVIDIA went to buy ARM not too long ago, everyone went, shit, that depends on ARM. What are we going to do? And then like, okay, we better sort of do this RISC-V thing that's been floating around for some time.
But also the trade war and China situation had a lot of Chinese firms looking at what do we do if we get cut off from ARM intellectual property.
Yeah,
right.
So that's why they're interested in risk, and that's why we see lots of risk work happening in China for sure.
I'm gonna have to share something actually with you guys. I'm gonna see if I can get a URL for this. So there's actually a case study. I'll just bring this up on stream because I don't know where the URL is, but I'm sure people can find it. If give me 1 second here. Share, present. Sure. I shouldn't have said anything. Now it's going to become difficult. Let's see if this works. So this is an interesting. Let's see. Get up on stream. There we go. So this is a scientific paper, and as it says here, the lovely long title: "Post-lab designed a detection of stealthy hardware trojans in a RISC-V case study." So basically, these computer scientists and various other people in academia have been looking at ways to look at layouts of processors to see if someone's actually hiding trojans in the actual processors themselves.
Sure.
And there's a lot of work around this at the moment, specifically obviously RISC-V being open and everything else. How you might go around like the correct detection and of these kind of circuits and so on that are inside the processor. But it's quite interesting. Yeah.
Is this related to stuff with Stuxnet?
I think it's more about there is that kind of like level, but this is the thing, right? Because CPUs are so complicated, they run microcode and everything else. It's like it's a system on a chip. It's like, like people were scared about like ROM BIOSes and motherboards coming from China, by having like some sort of code running in them that could monitor the network or something, right? And it's like, it's that same sort of thing. Now we're getting these RISC-V processors. You need to really look at how they're being made at that level to really understand post layouts. So it's like after they've been manufactured, has anyone put anything in it? That is what I'm finally going to get inside my device. Scary stuff.
It is.
Glad people
was all the way down, right, Chris?
Well, Bunny Huang did a brilliant presentation on this at one of the Chaos Computer Convention things a few years back, and it's kind of a redo of the whole question of how do we trust. And when you start looking into the hardware side of it, it's difficult. But he also then went on to develop a device called the Precursor, which is intended for people to store private keys in and that sort of thing, where it's supposed to be simple enough hardware that you can analyze it for yourself, whether it's been interfered with.
Interesting.
And that's the question: is where do you keep your keys? I mean, I think if everything's encrypted, where do you keep the keys? Where do you play with unencrypted data? You should trust that. But outside of that, is encrypted until everybody goes around with a quantum computer on their wrist, and I think you're in pretty good shape. But that's really what you got to ask: is where are the keys, and do I trust where the keys are, and where I'm processing unencrypted data. Otherwise, who cares, right? Don't care.
Well, it's like that. What was it? There's been a couple of over the years, a couple of exploits around this kind of thing with like even server software when it's sitting there in memory.
Yeah.
You can analyze the memory. You might have like leftover places in memory where like clear text passwords are being like
Big time, yeah, absolutely.
processed by the application to go through a table or something and work out what the hashes are. Very bad, but you know what I mean. Like it's this kind of like notion of if it's left in memory and someone can exploit that and get access to that, then it's readable.
Yeah, that's why we're working with like the SIM card manufacturers, like have all this cryptographic stuff for authentication happen inside a device that means that you never have any of that clear text in memory. It's in memory inside a SIM card, or it's in memory inside a TPU, and by design they haven't got access. Although even with the most secure stuff, there's still vulnerabilities. There were some vulnerabilities in TPM 2.0 announced, I think, this last week. So, but at least there's a focus on security on those hardware bits of hardware. And so, there's it depends on the use case, and it depends on what hardware is available for sure. But where you put the keys is something you should consider for sure.
It's always a cat and mouse game, and the other side of this is, once you have access to hardware, really, like it's always game over at some point, right? Like
it's game over unless you put the keys in a very, very safe place. So I mean, if you're worried about that stuff, what we've been trying to do at our time is not have to have the developer worry about that stuff. What we essentially designed is something that you don't even see any of this happening, but the SDK is getting on and doing the right thing for you. I mean, you can control where the keys come from and that sort of good stuff. So and everything in between. On the edge, it's obviously going to be unencrypted, and on the other edge, it's going to be unencrypted. In between, nobody can see your data. That's it. Period. So it's end-to-end encrypted.
I tell you what we're going to do. We've been talking an awful long time, and I'm pretty sure people in the stream are these guys never going to shut up about inventing stuff?
Probably.
The answer is no, never. But I think we should get through a few questions.
Well, before that, just bring up Flutter Fridays.
Oh yes, please.
So Christian speaks about Flutter Fridays because he was a guest us the other week.
So Flutter Fridays is a show that the Outsign team's been running now for, I think, 8 or 9 episodes, because the 10th one's coming up soon, I think. So every other week, a guest and a quiz to talk about Flutter. So the one I did, we talked more about Dart because my focus is on Dart, and Flutter is just something I kind of skirmish with occasionally for demo apps. And I think for the 10th episode, we might be getting you on, Colin, to talk about some tiny stuff.
That'll be fun. It's a lot of fun for sure. Randall always wins.
There are prizes. There are prizes. Actual money will come to you via email. I know because I won first place one time. I now always compete, but I disqualify myself. So you can get one of the top 3 prizes, even if I take one of the top slots. So feel free to come along. And it's always a challenge for me because the team does great questions. Yeah. They really are. It's like, and it's also like timing's important, and the questions aren't always exactly like you could read this one easily and read all the answers easily. So I'm thinking, okay, so it's usually I'm usually about 2 or 3 seconds into the question before I get an answer, and I am wrong more often than I think I should be. So this is actually good. They're good questions. They're really good questions. We have a lot of fun. We also do a Q&A session. They also do a Q&A session kind of like this for a little while with the guests. So it's kind of fun. Definitely check it out.
It's all interactive.
Every other Friday. You'll see me in the chat room every week, but only on the camera once a couple of months ago. Yeah.
Cool.
Although they could invite me back, I guess. Yeah, I could always do it.
Is that hint?
Yeah.
If you ever want to talk about the Flutteristas, you know where I am.
Yeah, there you go. Excellent.
Yeah,
grab you on as well, Daniel.
Shows are in play. It's all going.
I suspect I would
all
miss
right.
more questions than Randall, though.
I need to. I think I was asked to come on the show multiple times. Just haven't had the time.
You've been a bit busy.
I'm always busy now. I don't know what it's all this Flutter stuff. It keeps getting popular. I don't know what that's about. Right. I think we'll just jump through a few questions and then clear off, and then we can maybe do a bit of demos. And you guys probably had to head off. We've been talking quite a long time. I don't know how long you guys have got, so I don't want to. I think is it been just under an hour, just over an hour already?
Wow.
So,
Coming up on an hour.
Yeah, it's just we just talk and talk. I'm sure people are annoyed.
I'm good for a little bit longer. You good?
All right, let's see. First question, Imad. I need to know about calling other languages in Dart, not just C or Java, but also for others like JavaScript, Web, and Scala. So,
First of all, if you can call Java, you can call Scala.
yeah.
Just thought I'd point that out, but the point still stands.
So any same as Kotlin, right? Any JVM based languages, you'd be able to use JNI to communicate with it. Should do at least. The problem you've got, and this is not one that's just Dart related or Flutter related. It's just that different languages work differently, right? And that's down at that byte level that we've been talking about. Down at how the software actually is compiled to work on the chip. They've been compiled to work differently. So you need something that both systems can communicate across. And this is where JNI is a sort of mechanism to communicate the way that the outside world of Java works to what works inside the Java and Java virtual machine. And the same goes for Dart. We have FFI in Dart, which enables Dart applications to communicate outside of Dart to the native world of the platform that you're running on. So if something can be compiled, you can use FFI. So that could be even Python. I think you can compile Python code to being run. There's a bunch of other languages, Rust, anything else. You can just use FFI to work with those, right? They are very particularly compiled languages. So any compiled language, FFI will work. Any interpreted languages, you need to look at the interpreter that they're using and how you might communicate with that. This could just be as simple as opening up a pipe or opening up some sort of communication channel with that external interpreter to send the code and get a response back. So these things like, I forget the name of it. No, there's other scriptable based languages like JavaScript. Oh, God, it's going out of my head. The one I literally had on my.
So something we've used a little bit to just glue things together is MQTT, but any message-oriented middleware will generally make a nice glue between languages. So MQ series, Kafka, AMQP.
I literally was thinking Lua script. That's what I was thinking in my head.
Yeah, there you go. That works as well.
But all that kind of stuff, yeah. The questioner here asking about JS and web. Dart compiled for web compiles to JS. You can access JS packages directly. So that's how you do that. If, however, you want your native code to be using JavaScript, then you need to embed a JavaScript engine for it to interpret the JavaScript to then work inside of Dart. And there is actually a couple of packages on pub.dev that do that. But again, if you're going to ship an app with JavaScript in it, just so you can use JavaScript, you're probably doing it wrong in terms of you've now just shipped an entire engine, which is probably like 20 meg. I think the V8 engine or something like that is that you ship. It's like, why increase your app to now use 10 kilobytes of JavaScript, right? Rewrite that JavaScript in Dart and compile it into your app. That would be the better approach, right? I don't know what you're doing. Obviously, there's limitations, but pick and choose the right solution for the problem that you're trying to deal with.
And again, WASM might have a part to play here as well, because clearly there's an interface between the JavaScript environment in the browser and the WASM sandbox. And so if you can then, Dart can be compiled into WASM, so it could potentially be dropped in there. It's worth mentioning as well that for FFI, JNI, etc., the sort of common lingua franca for all of those is C. There was a great blog post last year of C is no longer a programming language. It's become the way that other programming languages talk to each other. And so all of those sort of interfaces are defined by C.
even calling conventions on different platforms and see how incompatible with each other, it is definitely, it can be difficult when you get low down. So yeah, if you can rely on high level communications, it can be a lot easier and faster to develop. That's another thing to mention here. So you don't have to use FFI, right? There's a lot of steps to do there. But if you just want to start up a program externally, like start up a V8 engine and run JavaScript, and then you can then get a standard in, standard out channel to it and communicate with that external process. That works just as well. It depends on your use case, but have a think about those things.
And the other thing I would kind of point out on this is that, if you're doing this kind of running, you've become platform dependent. So you probably, maybe not with JavaScript, but with with the compiled languages, you start becoming platform dependent. And so that's where you also probably want to be looking at, using plugins so that you've got the capability of creating it for whatever environments you may, even if you don't want them now, but whatever you might want in the future. You may think it's only going to run on iOS, but you may want to run it on Android or whatever. And so having a plugin so that you've got the way to get to this native code is something you need to probably think of at the beginning.
They did. I'm trying to remember how long ago it was, but you can now do plugins in Dart as well, which basically means that you can actually treat Windows, Mac, Linux as a Dart plugin, and then they all use FFI to communicate with the Linux specific library, the Mac library, or the Windows library for doing those various things. There's lots of documentation, and the place to go is flutter.dev. Right. Let's
try and do the simplest thing. Is my recommendation.
Oh yeah, always.
Just open up a socket or open up a web socket. Both, that's lowest common denominator between code. You'd definitely be able to do it that way. As Chris mentioned, MQTT is really great for this. We actually did the MWC project where Chris was working on a bit, I was working on a bit, Gary was working on a bit, and we just used MQTT because we knew we'd be able to glue it together afterwards. Worked perfectly. I didn't need to know anything about Chris's code or Gary's code. It just worked, which was a great way to interface stuff at the end when we didn't even know what the programming language that Chris or Gary was even using. Didn't matter to us. So pretty cool.
Next question. Billy asks, are there any other resources available for Patreon contributors? So we do a Hump Day Q&A. And if you have subscribed but haven't got access, we also do we also run a Mastodon server, and there's Randall's little retweet for today's show. This again is this is all that's going to be in here right now. But yeah, so this is essentially Twitter but open source, shall we say? There's better ways to explain it than that, but I'm not going to go there right now because we'll be here for a long time. But that's another resource that's open. We try to do more, and we think we'll start doing some code review stuff and some other things we're working on at the moment. But resources are limited. That's okay. On to the next one. Hopefully that helped. Love and to say, just as that sort of person said, there is a Patreon, and that Patreon, if I can try and find the link here, the Patreon. There we go. Patreon.com/FlutterCommunity. That helps fund this channel and what we do here for everyone. This is the YouTube channel. So we help out the Flutteristas. There's a bunch of other stuff. There's lots of talks, conferences, and all sorts of other things that all goes to help. Mainly, it's about running the Mastodon server. In fact, that Mastodon server, I just spent £800, way too much. I totally overspec'd it, and after monitoring, I was like, yeah, I should not be paying like £200 a month, for this server. It just does not need that, right? But that came out of my own pocket. That didn't come out of the Patreon. But yeah, this is where these kind of things go to help run these things like this. That we use for doing the stream cost money every month. So any help, and if you like the questions that are on, like what we do here, any help is always designed.
Could we give them first answer? I mean, can we do something like that and maybe come up with something we could do with that?
This involves doing really complicated things like having lists of people and who does what, and they use a different nickname. Maybe.
When I saw that question,
I like the idea. I like the idea. It's one of those things that if depending on the platform, right? Like if we were to do YouTube, I think there's the answer to that is if we did YouTube. What are they called? subs or membership on there, then they would be highlighted differently, so we could work it in that way. Probably something like that. Have a think about that. It sounds like an idea. We try and get to every question though. So.
Well, I know we do, or maybe have a way for them to submit in advance, or I don't know, something to.
Yeah, maybe.
I'm trying to think. I haven't heard us mention the Patreon in forever, so.
Yeah, that's why I just try to push it as much as I can. Right. I need your help. Listen, Matt, I need your help about automating the process of build process for Android and iOS and the deploying process to Play and App Stores. What is the best tools for this? Well, my first go-to answer to that is CodeMagic. There's plenty of ways of doing this kind of stuff. You go Fastlane, you can go GitHub Actions, you can go. There's a ton of these different tools. You can script it all yourself. Write it in dark code, whatever, right? But if you want the simple, most direct way of doing this is CodeMagic. It literally set up to make it point and click. You go in there, you click on a few things, you log into your Play Store, you log into your App Store through their thing, and it follow the instructions that they've got for sharing your tokens and all the rest of it. And magically, when you press build and it succeeds, it uploads it to the stores for you.
Well, and that lets you do an iOS app without having a Mac too, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. Yeah, that's another point to mention. That the build server, they run Mac build servers so that you can compile your project for iOS. Yeah, I mean, it's not just that, right? They can run tests, and there's a whole slew of things there. So that's where I'd suggest you go to. I should probably have the website here. Hang on, and share this link.
Codemagic.io. Codemagic.io.
It's codemagic.io. Yeah, that's the one. I knew that.
I know you
We're
think.
not sponsored by Flutter London.
But it's nice every now and then for me to be able to get some answer in before you think of it.
Oh yeah, sorry. There you go. So it's codemagic.io, and there you go. So it's not just Flutter, but it primarily started off as Flutter, and then yeah, used by lots of people. There you go. Anyway, right. Let's get back to it.
I normally find the most difficult thing of publishing in the stores is trying to get your graphics in the right format. So it's just such a pain.
Yeah. Especially as they change their requirements.
They change their requirements, yeah. So the code's the easy bit, trying to get all the graphics in the right place, and they do some pretty clever stuff on if you try and publish into the Apple Store and you're using a screenshot from an Android, they will notice.
The amount of times I've had to deal with it's not just that, but then they go, "Oh, you can't deploy because you need screenshots from an iPad."
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
And we need portrait and landscape, but we need this and we need that, and you're like,
yeah, the code bit's easy. It's the graphics and the text and all the other fiddly bits are fiddly. Yeah. So you end up doing a lot by hand anyway. Is my only caveat to using any of the automation tools. You'll still have to do things by hand.
Yeah, and the nice thing about, to be honest, the nice thing about it's very rarely that you have to change things. So obviously, you want to keep your screenshots fresh, right? But things like the privacy policy and going for the stuff in App Store listings, it is kind of stuff you do once. Yeah. And obviously, if you change your permissions, it'll tell you what you need to change. But for the most part, it's not that bad all the time. But it is definitely still really difficult to get something on the Play Store initially.
Yeah.
Or Apple App Store.
But do it anyway. Yeah, I'd love to see apps not just sort of running, but actually in the stores. That's very cool.
For sure. And do you know what? I've seen other people, they did this. They build their, I hear this from other developers. They did something for themselves. They chucked it up on the Play Store. Before they know it, they've got 200,000 people, using their product.
Yeah.
They're relying on something that they made for themselves. And then they're getting feature requests, they're getting improvements, and they start building a community and something around something they built, which is really nice.
The other thing to remember is because you've got a Flutter app, don't forget. I mean, you're obviously, if you go to iOS, you can go easily to Mac OS, and if you're on Android, then it's easy. But don't forget us Windows people. Get into the Windows Store as well.
Nope.
It's actually pretty interesting to go through the process to get an app into the Windows Store. So don't forget those Windows. The Windows Store is a thing.
There's a was it the 3.7? Wasn't it the last stable release? Flutter 4. They announced that really great packaging tool for Windows. They announced.
Yeah, it makes it a lot easier. Yeah, I can't remember what
Yeah,
it's called, but I did use it.
the Medium article for Flutter Forward and the announcements has this tool in it. I remember it being announced, which allows you to like type in a command. You add it to your dev dependent, type in a command, and it will package up your app.
It will package it all up
for
for
the
you.
Windows Store.
Yeah. So don't forget us Windows people.
All right, let's go. Next question. Mitto, regular. What's the difference between Dart VM and Dart Runtime? Is either better than the other? Anyone want to take a stab at this?
Chris has done a lot of work in this space.
And the Dart VM and Dart Runtime can sometimes those terms can be used interchangeably, but if I think about a more sort of strict definition of those, when we download the Dart SDK, the software development kit, then one of the components within that is the Dart virtual machine. So when we say Dart run something, then it's spinning up the Dart virtual machine and executing it inside of that. And a nice thing that you can do then is make use of all of the dev tools, so you can profile it and see what's happening with CPU flame graphs and memory and garbage collection and all of that stuff. But we don't have to Dart run things. We can Dart compile them, and we can then run that as a native binary. Now, runtime is something that can be found in the Dart Docker official image. And that's just a copy of the minimum set of libraries that are needed to put a Dart executable on top of. And so I kind of briefly mentioned earlier on, Dart uses dynamic linking. So some other languages, such as Go or with C, we can do static linking, which means that we can create a binary that has no dependencies at all. And that's not possible with Dart. Dart does have a sort of minimal set of dependencies, but it's tiny. It's like about 2 megs on x86. So that's the set of dependencies that sits in that runtime directory. And so if you want a really minimal Dart Docker image, you kind of copy those runtime bits in, and then you drop your AOT executable on top of that, and you're good to go. There's other things we can compile to that are kind of in the middle, though. So you can compile to an AOT a JIT snapshot. And so that's then a pre-compiled application. So it takes less time to start up, but it's still run inside of the Dart VM. So you need a fuller set of dependencies for that, and it consumes a lot more memory, but you've still got then the Dart dev tools. And so if you want to kind of get something that's in that kind of middle ground between startup time and memory footprint, then JIT snapshot is one of the options there. And so there isn't a better answer here. There's a set of trade-offs about how rich you want the debugging experience to be, and how large you want the memory footprint to be, and how long you're willing to wait for things to start up, and kind of slide those dials to choose what best fits your application and where you're using it.
It also provides, I feel like it also provides Dart its power, right? Like in the hot reload, for example, right? Like these things just wouldn't be possible if the language couldn't support both those environments. I suppose also speaking about this, like the Dart VM, the Dart VM itself is not a traditional virtual machine, right? It's not like it. You talk about like shipping the JIT environment, it does get shipped with a runtime environment for like garbage collection and other things, but it's not the same as, you know, a full VM. And the same goes from a traditional VM perspective. It's not like every instruction is getting put through that VM to be interpreted at runtime, right? Like there's
and so when we create a native binary with AOT, things like the garbage collection are actually a snapshot that's compiled into that binary. So it's self-contained in that respect, but it still has these operating system dependencies out of libc, which means you can't just drop it into an empty container, because otherwise it's not going to be able to find the pieces that it needs to dynamically link to.
I was just trying to find, there's actually there's several packages that revolve around this, and for the life of me, I can't find the one I'm looking for. But the publisher you're looking for is tools.dart.dev. If you want to go look at some of the ones that Dart team have actually built, you got like VM service around the protocol that's used, the debugging protocol used for the web stuff. There's a bunch of packages in here, all revolving around this, like the web compiler, analyzer. This is all sort of like the inner workings of what you've probably been using daily as a end user, but never really kind of get your sort of hands on, should we say? I thought I was scrolling through the wrong screen, but anyway. So yeah, anyway, there's a bunch of libraries in here. It's not sharing. Why is it not sharing? There we go. Yeah, front end server client test API coverage. Anyway, there's a ton of packages in here you guys can sort of look through to kind of see. But yeah, there is a package that defines the kernel specification as well, which is that kind of what the VM interprets basically. But I can't find it now. I'm pretty sure it's in there somewhere. Anyway, yeah. So there's always stuff to research and look at. Oh, I just remember where it is. Right, I've seen it recently. Apparently the repo's been archived, so I don't know what's changed. But I'll bring this up on stream, and I'll send the link. There was a repo with the package was called kernel, the IR representation of the sort of kernel files, which are the output ready for the VM to interpret. So I'm guessing this isn't some old package, or they've incorporated this now into something else. However, there is this kind of notion of the binary file format, which is what the Dart VM interprets to know how you built your app, so what the class names are and the library fields and all the symbols that you typed in the source code, how it's represented in a binary form. So a library contains a bunch of classes and so on. But I'll share that on here anyway. All right, moving on. Next question. Let's see. Is that the next one? I think it's the next one. How much important is it to make a data class mutable? What is the benefit, and when can I ignore it?
I think he probably means the other way around, right? I mean, making it immutable.
Well, I mean, I think so. So first of all, let's be clear about this. So immutable means it does not change, right? It is essentially final. You set the variables, it does not change. Mutable means you can change it. These are the very similar naming terms. So immutable, mutable, right? Just for those that are at home that are watching, we know this. But how important is it? It's really just interesting about it. It depends on your model, right? So like from my experience in building mobile phone apps, the mutability side of having data models that are mutable just leads to very big problems in terms of you really want your UI and what the user sees to be representative of your state. And if your state can change without updating the UI, that leads to problems. And that's normally where things have gone over the years. There was a push in the early days of mobile development to go to this kind of immutable data model kind of idea. And it made big changes because it meant that, what we call an identity match between objects. When you create a new object, even though it's got the same fields, they have a different identity. So you can treat it as if it's a new version of the same object. And you've got some sort of flow and structure around these things. So at the time...
Yeah, I was going to say, he has confirmed he did mean immutable. Yes.
Yeah. So this is kind of what I'm talking about right now. So the idea here is that, if you mutate an object, that is, if you change the fields and the UI doesn't, and you don't notify anyone that you've changed those fields, you may forget to do that, or something doesn't lead on to something else. And then suddenly what happens is when it does get notified, suddenly something changes on the screen like that. Suddenly buttons appear or buttons get disabled and weird things happen. So there's this kind of very modern approach. More modern approach is this kind of notion of immutable data models in a unidirectional data flow, which is the terms given that data flows in one direction. So you still have like the user makes changes, they go to the back end updates its models and structures, they come back to the front end, and the front end represents the change to that state, and you kind of get this like flow of data that goes in one direction. And this keeps it really easy to debug. The notion, the ideas about how it works can easily be debugged and worked on. But if you don't want to do that, that's entirely up to you. The benefits, I mean, I don't know if I could say this, the direct tangible benefits are more about ease of development and ease of debugging. Definitely, like, there's no reason why you can't have all models have mutable fields. It's just you need to make sure that you're managing your data a lot with tighter controls. And yeah, I mean, half the problem with developing, we talk about naming things, but another half is protection. So Java has this notion of like private, protected, and public. We still have those inside Dart. So Dart, you start with an underscore, it's private. You can't access that outside scope. Everything else is considered public. However, you can do @protected, which is just a hint, which is from the meta package, which just you can then have lints and warnings to say you can use this, but only not publicly, only inherited classes. We also now getting with Dart 3, is it, or upcoming versions of Dart? I don't know when they're going to release this. We're going to get class modifiers, and these are going to give us like final sealed data. There's a whole bunch of them. And we've spoken about this before, and these again make these differences, allow us to have final control over that. But more to the point, it's about protection. The reason why we make a field private, the reason why you make any field private is to say it does not change. Once it's been set, it does not change. This has many benefits that you just, if it does change like that, therefore you know it cannot change, right? So you know that there can never be a bug that comes around from this, right? I'm gone. Anyone else?
Yeah, sure. I can talk about this a little bit, unless one of our other guests wants to, because I'm here every week. So,
Go ahead.
yeah, sure.
Okay.
So, like, a practical example here is when I get my data in from an API call, those are all immutable classes, because once it comes in, that data doesn't change. The answer I got back doesn't change. However, sometimes I will call a widget where it may change a whole bunch of stuff related to that. And for that, I create a class, a field group, whatever kind of class you want to call it, that contains the data for that. Well, that data is intended to change because I'm going into the UI to change it. We're entering stuff. And when I get that back, then I can deal with that. And so I think there's cases where stuff is definitely immutable. I think there's cases where it's definitely mutable. And so, but I do think there's a little area in the middle that we play around with. And I'm not sure, I think it really does come down to if changing gets rare, for example, create a copy with and make it immutable.
Yeah.
You can't make consts. You can't make consts out of a class that's not immutable. So if the class is mutable, you cannot make a const. So there's some, benefits. I'm going to put a little bit in quotes on that. You get out of that because it lets you do certain things there. I mean, in the practical world, how much that helps, that remains to be seen. But yeah.
I really like that mention there of the form, because when you're filling in a form, those fields change all the time. It's not until you press the submit button or you continue to the next screen or something that you're actually saying that's final. I'm locking that state in, and at that point you might say, okay, you can treat the data class, you would say, that's behind your form that holds the state, not really as a data model, but more as a class that represents the form. It has the fields, and at the very end you have like a build method or a output or save or something, and it returns back your immutable object from that. And now you've got that. You by accident you can't change the fields in that model, right? That's locked in at that point. But you can always do something where you hand that model back to that original type of class and saying initialize the mutable version with this immutable state, and then you can edit again and produce another copy. And there's various patterns around this. Builder pattern comes to mind, very similar. But yeah, this kind of notion of when to have something immutable, when to have immutable is more about, I like that idea of that notion of how often it changes, right? Or should it be editable, right? That kind of state.
And a related thing here is CALM theorem. So that's the consistency is logical moneticity. And that's kind of come about from the challenges that we have in distributed computing around updating state, where you've got multiple things could be changing it at the same time. So we're normally using a consensus algorithm to kind of deal with the fight over who has the change. And so you get things like Paxos and Raft come into play for that. But if you've got data that can be monotonic, then you don't need consensus. And so that can save you a whole bunch of problems and potential issues over holding locks and that kind of thing that come about when you're trying to use a consensus algorithm. And it massively kind of de-scopes the complexity of your system. So it's worth thinking about that aspect under certain circumstances as well. So you try and keep your data operations monotonic.
I just learned a new word, monotonic. It does not increase or decrease.
I like this. I like that sort of. I like the way that Dart. So developers that come to Dart, right? They've never really experienced that kind of multi-threaded, concurrent environment that now kind of more exists in sort of scalability. So it does exist. Don't get me wrong, in apps, but it's not apps that really take advantage of that well. It kind of it's been pushed to relegate to the server side, and now we scale things, and it's the same problems, but just now at scale.
Yeah, and when we're developing Flutter apps, it's kind of everything's normally hunky-dory within the phone, but they're normally talking to some kind of back end. And so we've been encouraging full stack Dart. So quite often, Flutter developers are now looking at using Dart on their back end. But what are the challenges then around, I've got 200,000 people downloaded my app and they're all trying to update the same stuff on my database. Is it a problem or not?
Yeah, right. There's it's not even that. It's just like there's obviously consistency with the database, but another one that I've seen before is like people, again, I think people don't understand the nice idea of your server does not hold state. So most people, again, like a lot of the old way of doing things is like your website might be like have some sort of running state basically, and most of the time you actually want that state to be passed in and out of your APIs. So like for example, this is something that occurs more now in these situations is like you have a JWT token to represent your authentication token. And inside that, it carries the data of what that user ID is, and this is all signed, it's all protected. So it means that when it receives by the server, it knows what user is making that API call. It doesn't have to have a list of connection to user account or anything like that. It's past that data. There's a name for that. I forgot the name of that. Go on.
I do want to say that this is all hearkening back to the early 90s when we were inventing the web. Us and a bunch of people in the
Pearl,
community.
Pearl.
Hello, everybody. Hello, Pearl. That for forms, you would have to carry the form data from each incoming hit. You'd have to take all that data plus all the new form fields and resend that back to the next hit. Otherwise, you had no sessions, no continuity. And so you learn to do this sort of like slowly mutating and adding to state. And then you also learn to do things like don't trust anything that ever comes in, because people can simply go in and edit stuff and put whatever they want in there. So it was a fun time. It was a good time.
Honestly,
it was a fun time.
The web evolved into that model of let's now chuck everything in cookies.
Yeah,
that's what happened after
it's
that.
The same thing.
Let's maintain our state cookies and ship it in every request. Why not?
Right.
Anyway,
right.
All right.
Okay.
Cool. Let's get on to the next question. Is there a way of isolating the development of multiple Flutter projects, each using different versions of the same package without Docker?
Sure.
Is there a way of isolating the development of multiple Flutter projects? Each is I mean, yes.
Yeah, I mean,
my misunderstanding is that because that's just isolated. I mean, what level of isolation? Because say without Docker, I mean, having a container would be the ultimate isolation, I guess.
How I read
it. Specific in your pub spec. I mean, just like be really specific in your pub spec, and then do a pub get or pub update, and you'll get the right packages, right? So,
and if you've got a mono repo, then maybe take a look at Melos.
Yeah, Melos is great.
Sorry, was that what you're thinking of? But that's a good point you said about the specifics. A lot of people just put the correct caret, the upwards.
Yeah, exactly. If you're like
version.
ridiculously specific, which I mean you can be, you can just say I want this particular version, then HubGet will sort you out. You'll be good.
Yeah,
something else I was going to say something else we do in our packages is have dev time package dependency overrides. And actually, we had to write a little bit of Python to take care of that because it was one of the areas where Dart's YAML handling was not where we wanted it to be. And I've been pointed subsequently at some YAML libraries that might allow us to make a pure Dart solution. But kind of what we do there is before we do the pub-get, we run a Python script that subs in dependency overrides so that you can be hitting, say, a GitHub version of your dependency rather than a pubdev version of your dependency while you're doing your testing. And that's in our open source repos, so feel free to go and.
I'm gonna tell you something that was added. So the Melos team had very similar problems in what they were doing, and they in consult with the Dart team added a new feature called PubSpec overrides YAML. It actually produces a separate YAML file for just your overrides, and then the idea is that you can not check that in, so you can still have normal overrides and everything else behaving as you would do in your PubSpec, but this overrides file can exist separately, and you can have that just for testing or just for a local use.
Don't forget to do a pub clean though. First of all, sometimes there's some garbage laid around, so I've got into the habit of doing that. Sometimes it may be another library hanging around that might cause you trouble. So.
One thing I would when I read this question, I was thinking of they were developing the packages maybe. So if you're developing your own packages, then you can put a ref in your pubspec.yaml, and you can pull down from your repository, and you can give it a ref with a tag or a version or whatever, commit, whatever it is you want to do in that case. So that you could still be building against multiple packages, with different projects. You've got different versions of your package with the projects. So
yeah, you can ref a branch. You can do. There's a whole bunch of things that's really cool. We often do that, like when we're building something new. Refer to our own branch.
So I was just going to mention though that just on that point, most people don't realize, like if you, let's say this is quite common. This was quite a common occurrence during alpha. So bear with me. But the point was, let's say you had a third-party package, and Flutter's changed, it's upgraded, it now it's not support this third-party package doesn't yet support the new version of Flutter, or conversely, that's just one example, but it has different conflicting third-party dependencies, so you both depend on different versions of the same same package. Let's say Meta, the Meta package. One's got 1.7, another's got 1.8, and it just does not want to build. You can use a PubSpec override for that locally, great. But also, what you can also do, depending on what you're doing, is you fork that other package into your own GitHub. You make whatever modifications you need to make. You can then locally do a PubSpec override for that Git. So whilst you're developing, you're using your modified version locally, and then you submit a PR back to the original author saying, I fixed this issue, I've updated this. And then once they've pulled your PR back in, now you can then take out that override and just go back to using the new version, update your version to the one that's been published. And there's quite a common approach to kind of like, if you either need to override locally, it's fine. But if there's a more complex change that you need to make, you can pull it in, still have your PubSpec reference, the one from pub.dev, but have a temporal override for your local modified version, which can also be handy.
That's how I learned about that, was doing that exact thing. That was my first PR to get merged in on a package, was because of that. Yeah.
Go on, Randall.
Yeah. I was just going to say that when you said you were using Python scripts to update YAML before, I presume you're familiar with the JQ tool, which allows you to do JSON, essentially stream edits. There's YQ also that does YAML, and it will do in-place edits on YAML. So you can actually do YQ, change foo to bar inside a YAML file. It's really slick.
Yeah, it's nice. And I think one of the key points here is you need to actually have a YAML 1.2 parser that'll do format preservation, because otherwise things get messy real quick.
Yeah, yeah. Well, YAML's like that. Ingy's a great guy. He's in the Perl community. At least he was for many years, and he was one of the creators of YAML. And it's no surprise to me that YAML came out the way it did. So, yeah.
Yeah, just ask any of the Kubernetes community about how they feel about YAML.
But at least every YAML parser also parses JSON. So if you ever hate YAML, just do that exact whole file in JSON, and it totally works. Yes, it totally works.
That has its own set of problems as well, though.
Yeah.
I'd like to do comments, please. All right, let's see. Next question. Robin asks, moving a project to Go Router and still learning, what is the best way to manage error message pop-ups so that they show one at a time and not multiple of the same? Use Pages API before that. What is the best way to manage error message pop-ups so they show one at a time and not multiple at the same time? Okay. So normally in a lot of situations when you're trying to handle errors in your application, you might have like some top level widget, and then you can just add yourself a little queue, or you literally you can give it a state, and you can do you use a provider. There's a ton of ways of doing this, but the idea being that you're just sending show this next error message, show this next error message, and so on. And then at your top level widget, it pulls the next one off for a time period and shows it. And then when timeout happens, like 2 seconds, it disappears and shows the next one. And in fact, exactly what I just described is what the Flutter team have done. So Scaffold and it has Scaffold Messenger, and Scaffold Messenger does this. So when you create a snack bar, you give it a You give it a timeout, and if you want to clear the current queue or add it on top, you can do this kind of stuff. But basically, just send your snack bars, and one will show up, and then when it disappears, it'll show the next one, and so on. But of course, if you push out the same error message 5 times, it will show the same error message 5 times. So this raw around sort of your handling of errors to the user. I also like a lot of the time showing an error message is just completely pointless. It tells them that something went wrong, but there's no sort of projection as to how to resolve that error, right? So from a user perspective, they're the worst case scenario, right? Like boom, something went wrong. Great. How do I fix that, right? So I think a lot of those original idea behind snack bar is like you have a retry button, right? And it persists in some fashion. But a lot of the time, depending on whatever you're building, it's not good enough, right? So you end up having to probably do like a little notification center and have some sort of way of like clicking on something and it takes you back to the screen with the form filled out so you can make changes and press try again or that kind of thing. That's more about how you build that stuff into your application. But I'm assuming you mean this rather than like, it doesn't sound like it's Go Router related directly. Error message pop-ups. The other side is if you're using pop-ups that are routes, that's not a good idea, I don't think. I mean, it's definitely workable, but again, you've got the same problem that you're just pushing these things and they just keep popping up on the screen, which was like always a problem in Android 1 with error message dialogues that people would use, right? So you have an error in API, just pops up this dialogue in the middle of the screen, doesn't work. And you're like, great, thanks. So I don't know. Has anyone got any points around error handling?
I love your point around don't give an error unless you are expecting somebody to do something with it. So the error that is worth mentioning is something that you can do. Somebody can do something about it. So our favorite one is you haven't got internet connectivity. So you're trying to send something, switch on Wi-Fi, switch on 4G, whatever you're going to do, but you're not going to be able to do anything unless there's network connectivity. Other than that, your program should handle it, right? I mean, this is an action that you can give somebody, then try and deal with it, I guess, is the only advice I give. Nobody likes error messages.
Yeah, definitely. I was going to say, just on that point, like a lot of applications I've built, they end up having like a little banner that pops up somewhere, like a little bar or something on the display, which says you're not connected, right?
Exactly.
Or you're not connected. Please connect, to use this application. And then in offline first behavior in applications is another thing, right? Like connectivity on a mobile device can be flaky depending on where you are. If you're traveling, if you're going at speed, like you may not have a good connection, or if it is a connection, it's ropey at best. And in those situations, it's like, no, you can't just be presenting the user with errors. Can't do it.
It's just need to widget, online, offline in that case, right? So those sort of things.
Like, a good example. Yeah, a good example of this is like, you imagine the times that you've got frustrated trying to use the internet, right? When you're moving, like on a train or something, it just doesn't load. I click on it, it takes forever. Like this is not the experience we want to give a user in an application. And the web behaves like that because of the way the web works. In an application, you have so much ability sort of to do things. Like you can literally, a good example is Gmail. You can Gmail, you can compose an email offline, you press the send button, and that's it. You may not have an internet connection, but when it goes online, it will send that. And if it fails at some point to send it after multiple retries and exponential backoff and various other things, it will then say, "Oh, couldn't send you a message." Right?
At least you know, right?
Yeah. And it's that same kind of thing in most applications. It should not be like the user is. It shouldn't be. A lot of error messages should not be presented to the user, right? It should just be gracefully handled.
Also, to jump back a week or two with stuff we were talking, the conversation we were having then is, especially if you're doing these message pop-ups from inside of Go Router somewhere, that sounds like it could be something that would be very much out of band, and that could be very jarring to the user. So you probably want to make your UI responsible for displaying things, and that changes things around quite a bit. Because if you try to display it from somewhere else, this slides all the fun of like where'd you get the context from and stuff like that. It could be a problem, from the experience.
I think the other thing that I learned pretty quickly is to use a logo, not print statement. So if you're actually doing debugging, go through the discipline using the logger, and then depending on what you want to look at, maybe what you're the developer, you want to see fine detailed logs, or just overview logs, or that using the logger construct and the logger package just saves so much time when you're trying to debug something. So I don't know whether this particular person's like trying to debug or whether they're actually doing user interface, but that's the other recommendation to do is use a logger package for
having tags, having hierarchical logging, having log levels. These are all there for a reason. They're there to help you.
So helpful.
The reason I think the problem we got with print statements in Dart is it's so easy to just touch.
Too easy.
And hit save and it hot reloads it. So it's super. So the debugging process of using print was something you would shy away from in every other language. But when hot reload comes along, it's super easy just to like.
So easy just to do that.
Has it got the value I want? Great. Then
I go into the habit of using Logger now, so it pays dividends. Then you can especially with pure Dart stuff, it's nice to be able to run in production, just minimal amount of logging, and then when something's going wrong, you step up the logging and you can see everything.
I will mention to other people, there's a problem I had on a project not too long ago, but that is logging during print. Logging during paint, not a good idea. So if you want to get that lovely crisp 60 FPS, 90 FPS, whatever it is,
don't have it in the middle of that.
don't have it. Now there is actually flags, debug paint profile, debug paint size. There's a bunch of flags that you just wrap around the logging statements. And when you're in this, what we're talking about earlier, the dev tools, there's a little tick box that allows you to say turn on log statements for paint. And you do that, it will automatically enable that chunk of code. And it all just works wonderfully, and it also means you're not logging out where you don't need to. And having a log that just chucks out data to you left, right, and center is just no good to anyone, because it's just Anyway, right, moving on before we bore people to death. Roberto, another regular. How can I make a button press a button with on press const? I heard through the goat run you make the function static. Is it ideal? Okay, it's nothing to do with it being static, right? All you need to do is move your function to be a member. The problem you've got is that you're specifying a lambda expression. So there's brackets, equals, and a pointer, and then whatever your function is. That makes it essentially build that function. It's complicated, but think of it as it's creating that function every single time your build method is being run. It creates that little lambda, and then to run your function. However, if you just refer to a member variable, that can be made const because it's done at compile time. It's not at runtime. It doesn't make that lambda expression. So you don't have to make functions static or have them global or anything special. Just pull them out of your build method, and then away you go. That should be fine.
That may not seem obvious that that may not seem obvious that the lambda is rebuilding it every time. But imagine the case where like you're passing into the lambda. One of the functions you're calling from inside that lambda is a class member. And that's going to get called based on that time. So that's how it's being rebuilt every time. Basically, whenever you're creating that object, or not rebuilt, but it's like a new instance every time you're doing it. So it's definitely not a constant.
Yeah, they're complicated. Closure is a complicated topic. I'm not going to get into it right now and how the scope works, but think of it being built every time that way. When you're in the C land, you start doing magical things like trampolines and various other complicated things to deal with these problems.
And if I built every time, we mean every time that button's created, not every time it's called.
Every time the build method is run, because it's running the constructor, it passes all the new parameters across. But yeah, it's the same thing. It's like this is the other thing. Like I'm just gonna hide this one. Again, most people don't realize, you run build, it's running all these constructors. If those constructors run more constructors and so on, right? Like build can get expensive. So if you have side effects from build, that's normally a bad thing. So you don't really want to have build get called, have that sort of do notify listeners and like all this kind of stuff. Then that causes more builds to occur. So you kind of get this rolling effect. And before you know it, your builds take forever and you're losing frames and things aren't very well. So build should literally just be build a representation of the widgets for the screen, and super simple, right? Like it shouldn't actually really try and do anything functional if at all possible. Your function in your build method should be sort of limited to the logic to actually change the widgets, right? That is the point. All right, anyway. Mytho says, since both Dart and Golang are from Google Teams, is it not efficient to combine the best of both worlds as time goes by into one? Or what would you call it? Go Dart? Dart Go? I mean...
So there is some stuff happening here. So I don't think the languages will ever be converged, but I do think there's closer alignment starting to happen within Google such that lessons being learnt by one team will find their way into the other. And I was really impressed the other week to see Tim Sneath saying that he was using some of his time to learn more Go. And so I think that kind of cross-pollination and understanding, because languages are often polarizing. They become like religions. So it's kind of I have chosen one, and it is the one true way, and it becomes a bit like that cartoon you see, right, where it's kind of got the people with the duck flags and the people with the rabbit flags, and say, but there can be no peace until they accept. But I think peace is starting to break out within Google in that those teams are talking to each other more than they maybe did in the past.
I've been teasing James in the comments a little bit for trolling a lot of times with his comments. I'm probably going to do it now, but I'm just thinking, well, Android and Flutter are both built by Google. Maybe they should converge over time.
Yeah, it just remind me that when people talk about this kind of stuff, it reminds me of the red. Some of us on the call probably know Red Dwarf, but there's the cat people like had a whole war just about the color hats they would wear. Is it red or is it blue, right? And it's like really, does it matter? Like use the one that's appropriate for the job, right? So you use Golang for when Golang's good, you use Dart when Dart's good. I do I'm gonna forget the name of it because it's been a while since I used Golang. they're not called channels.
Yeah, they are called channels. Yeah,
Channels, right? Yeah.
So Go channels come from communicating sequential processes, and if you go back to transputers and Occam in the 90s, then that was the first language to kind of implement channels that had mass adoption.
So for me, Dart has got like that async await go routine kind of style thing going on with its asynchronous processing, which kind of feels right. But we're still missing is isolates are great, but the communication between isolates is just really complicated when I don't think it needs to be. Personally, I'm sure guys.
Colin's been having some fun with isolates, haven't you, Colin?
I'm very confused by isolates. I mean,
Fun.
well, I mean, the really simple things with isolates are just confusing. Like if you in an isolate, you call an object, you have that object running, and then the original call to the isolate finishes. It kills everything else. Like my objects disappeared. It doesn't do that with main, but it does that with isolates. Why? Why does it do that?
I think I can explain that. Well, I should have a chat about that. But yeah, the notion
we need to have
of
a whole
channel
discussion about that because it wasted. I don't know what wasted. It kept my whole weekend very entertaining.
It's one of those things, right? It's when you start up, you do isolate.run, and you're accessing variables. And you think, okay, I'm just accessing this variable. But what actually happens is when the isolate starts up, it's doing essentially like a fork.
Oh yeah, no, it's doing a complete process.
So you can now get a copy of all those things.
Yeah, exactly.
And you modify the state over here, and the original one in the main isolate is just there. It stays as the way it was, right? And it's not obvious that you have this message. You have to push anything that you want it to change has to come through that a message.
Yeah, it's when the original call that you made to the isolate has finished. Any objects that were up and running in that isolate, they just get killed. I mean, it's just rude. You don't do that in the main. In the main, you never have that problem, right?
Yeah, if think it was small state running, unless you call it isolate.exit if you have some asynchronous work going on, right?
Yeah, it will just exit and kill all of those background objects, and it's just frustrating. So you basically have to have a in that original call to the isolate, you basically have to say, "Are you finished yet? Are you finished yet? Are you finished yet?"
You could do a completer, just have it await on the completer.
You
right?
can't. It will not wait.
No. I think there's a way around that. Well, we'll have to discuss that. But anyway,
it's a lot of fun though. So yeah, I mean, what I'm trying to do there is not. I mean, I could do a fork and have another bunch of Dart processes running, but I really wanted to have a whole bunch of isolates and make sure that that's running. So.
It's
really, we'll bring that code up later. It's fun.
I was gonna say it's a good thing we're null safe, right?
Oh yeah, we're all good.
Yeah, the way that you communicate with channels in Golang, I just want to briefly just touch on this. Probably no one's ever seen this before, and I'm just going to bring it up here briefly. This is from the Tor of the Go language, but it's this idea that you actually pass this is a channel of integers, and you can pass that across, and then you can literally communicate and receive stuff from channels with simple instructions, shall we say? And I think that this kind of sort of it may not look familiar in here, and you can go read this. There's a whole sort of buffer channels, and you can just keep going through and how you work it all, but the point here is that the idea of channels, I feel like, is a lot built into the language, is what we kind of need from Dart in terms of isolates. Having send ports, raw send ports, receive ports, having a send port and a receive port so you can do two-way communication, it just gets icky very quickly. And it's just like, why can't
I was using sockets inside my isolates. That's where it started. So that was for doing sophisticated stuff, I guess.
Oh no, I think I lost the question. I lost the last question. Oh no, it's gone. Let me see if I can.
We went on some sort of rabbit hole dive anyway, so.
No, that was no. I think we're good. No, that's fine. That one's done. All right, next question. All right, before we've only got a few questions left, and I think if you want to get any questions in, get them in now because they're not going to continue for much longer. This has already gone. The stream's already gone longer than I thought it was going to be, but we had a good time, I think, so far. So. I'm working on this question is, I'm working on a Flutter web project. I have created breakpoints by wrapping the whole app in a layout builder, red flag, every time the screen size changes, the app is rebuilt. Is there a better way? Okay, so you mean breakpoints as in like breakpoints on your UI. So when it gets to a tablet layout, you change like how many columns. When it gets to a desktop layout, you give it more columns, that kind of thing. So the answer is yes, there is. And go on. Do you want to give something to this, Danielle?
Yeah, I was going to jump in on this a little bit. First off, kudos for not using Media Query.
Yeah.
I like that. But the way I deal with this is I've created an enum with my different breakpoints defined. And so when the screen is resized, if it stays within that same enum, then same enum value, then the widget I'm calling doesn't change because it hasn't changed any of its dependencies, or doesn't rebuild, right? So that's how I do it.
Yeah.
And now I'm happy for Simon to give the correct answer.
No, that's good. I literally was about to say something. I've done. I'm trying to remember the observer class. What's it called? I can't remember. What it's called now. Come on. I need a Randall. Where's Randall? Damn it. I'm literally typing the API tool trying to remember what the class is called.
So okay, well, he's coming up. I was going to say while he was
The what class? The observer?
The standard one for observing.
Layout builder?
Get back. I gotta find it.
Layout builder.
Bug the hell out of me. No,
Which observing what? Media query? No.
If you need to observe any
breakpoint changes.
any
Yeah.
state from the sorry.
I was just saying.
Change
I- I-
identifier?
We're waiting for the actual breakpoint changes, not just the size changes.
No, but if let's say you want to change, let's say the locale changes, it comes across that the system channel and it ends up.
Inherited widget. I
Why
don't know.
why can't I?
Yeah, I
I'm
don't
going to
know
go
why.
looking at the source code. That's it. I'm going to go looking at
I
the
think
fucking source code. After
You're not being clear enough, or I'd have
Some
it
of the
already
chat-
by now too.
People must know what I'm talking about in the chat. I'm sure they do somewhere.
Somebody does. Somebody
Throw your
out in the
arms,
world does.
I'm gonna go find it. It's just bugging me now.
And I will say though on this question, depending on how you're building with that breakpoint, your app may need to rebuild everything anyway because if you're being somewhat responsive, you may still lay stuff out, but if you change it, pretty much everything's going to change.
Okay, you guys know this.
We
guys
just
were just
building an observer as well.
you just
Gabrielle said so.
You were just watching me squirm. That's it. Yeah, that's what it is. Everyone on the stream has used this. I know they have. Widgets binding observer.
Yeah, that's the one that.
For some reason,
Ah.
I just could not remember the name off the top of my head. Okay, so basically, this is the one that you use to you do widgets binding add observer or remove observer, and basically you get little you inherit this. Oh god, it's gonna do that. Right. I will find it. When you add an observer, it takes a parameter, which is binding observer, which is the interface. I'll find it. Here we go. And you get all these lovely methods. So did change accessibility, app lifecycle, locales, metrics, so on and so forth. Now in here you've got did change metrics. Where is it? And this happens when the dimensions of your application have changed. So what the idea is, you'd make a widget, which I've done in the past, which you register in your init and dispose you call the add and remove lifecycle listener, and then you override this method, and in there you can then check the Dart's window. So in Dart, in UI package, there's a global window, which would be the one time that I want to window top level. No, go on, Dart.io, go on, Dart UI. Sorry. Can I just search this for that window top level? That'd be nice. Flutter window. Yes, there's an instance of Flutter window. There we go. So there's a top level window. You can just literally type window anywhere in Flutter, and you'll get this instance come back. And on that, you can actually literally call a getter, which gives you the size of the window. And this is how Media Query works. Well, funny enough, Media Query has a constructor, Media Query data, sorry. If I get it right. Media Query data has a lovely constructor, which says from window. So there you go, from window, and you give it that window parameter. And magically, you'll get a Media Query data, which gives you the standard stuff you get from Media Query, but without registering a listener for Media Query. and then you can compare it and go, okay, has my breakpoint changed from being a large screen device to being a mid-screen device or a small device? And if it's the size has changed, then you can just fire an event and have like a stream or a listener or do whatever you want. And then those widgets that need to change based on that can then change. And this way, your entire app is not rebuilding whenever the size changes, right? Because it just needs to relay out. So yeah, that's what I've done in the past, and it works really well. And it means I feel like it's probably a widget that should be built into the framework. To be honest, like there's probably something in there somewhere, like a size layout builder or something. I don't know, but yeah, no. The way that I've always done it is using a. If I can go back to it, I've lost it already again. That's it. Widgets binding observer. Thank you, Gabriel.
And the other thing I would kind of like to say on that topic, if I can.
Yes,
is,
go for it.
If you're wrapping your entire app with it, that means that everything is built based upon a whole app kind of decision-making process. In general, you'd probably be better off with doing it much tighter into the widgets you're trying to build with, so they know how much space they've got available. So that, for example, you could put something inside of another one and it actually still behaves properly. Versus if you were to just, if it's a whole app, all you know is it's big or it's little. You don't know, well, how much does this particular widget have space for? So I would, if you've got like a little bit of a screen, if you did it on the screen itself, then if you put that inside of another, think like iframe on the web or something, you put it inside of something else, it's actually going to prepare itself and size itself properly. Whereas if you're just on the app, all you know is I've got a lot of space or I've got a little bit of space.
Yeah. And it's the same thing. Like most layout is done. That's why layout builders suggest, because you want to see what the current constraints are of your parent, and that chooses how many columns you use. In which case, you don't wrap your entire application, just wrap in the screen or the bit of the UI. Layout builder has downsides, right? So just be cautious again. So layout builder is essentially means that. So Flutter goes through 3 stages. There's more, but build, layout, paint. These are the sort of things. So build builds the widgets. Those widgets get inflated into the element tree. They go through layout, and that then before layout invokes, it builds the render tree. But anyway, it's builds your widgets. Then those widgets then get laid out, and then that's how they get positioned on the screen. And then paint takes place and it draws them on the screen. Now, if you resize, there's no need to rebuild anything, because it's your layout that's changing, right? It's your constraints for your layout that's changing. Now, layout builder, the idea is that based on the constraints of how visible your widget is, should we say, the constraints coming down, you can choose to build different widgets. Now, this means they then goes back to being build stage and then continues with layout. So you kind of like have an offshoot of build each time it's called. And that can add up in terms of time. It's not the expected way the pipeline's supposed to work, so it has downsides. Especially, you're doing that on every like when you resize, you end up doing those layout builds on like every frame. It adds up. So a lot of the time, it can be advantageous to. Let's say you did the master detail view. So you have like, this is a standard kind of view on mobile. So you have like a column with like a list. And then on the right-hand side, you have like your detail view, which is if I select an item from that list, it shows me details on the right. Now, when I'm on mobile, I just want to show the master view. And then when I'm on tablet, I want to show master details and maybe flip them around. Now, what you can actually do is make a widget that takes both those things and will call the constructor for both those widgets. But remember, it's not until those widgets are actually attached to the tree that actually get rendered and so on. So you can build them every time. The widgets are not normally, their configuration, they're not normally expensive to build. They shouldn't be. And then you can then later on choose how you want to lay them out during layout. And that's where custom multi-child layout and custom single-child layout, which are 2 widgets in the framework, that's where they come into play. That's when you can hand them the different pieces and then choose when to lay out, which is normally a better decision than layout builder, perhaps. Anyway, right, moving on.
All right. I'm going to have to drop off. It's
yeah, sorry. We have 2 questions left, and then that's it. We're going to wrap up, I think.
I'm going to go ahead and drop off, though. Thanks, everybody, for having me. And And thanks, Colin and Chris. It was very fun being on screen with you guys. Thank you.
Bye, Daniel.
Thanks.
Why simple Dart executable program consumes quite a lot of memory, 15 to 20 megabytes of RAM. Simple world, PS, while some language consume 2 to 5 megabytes of RAM. Well, we did explain this earlier. I want to see, Chris, you want to talk about this? Or I keep talking about all these questions. And you want to give this a stab? I mean,
well, it's back to the question of runtime, and so because even with an AOT binary, it's essentially brought in chunks of the virtual machine in order to do things like garbage collection. Then it gives it a more substantial memory footprint than something that's really clean and highly optimized, like you'd be able to achieve with a C or a Rust binary or even a Golang binary.
It's the difference in the language and what their target use is for. Like, to have that flexibility, it will cost some memory, but the memory, there's a trade-off, right? There's always a sort of CPU memory trade-off going on. But to have that kind of use case of be able to hot reload, be able to do this, you have a trade-off, right? When it comes to, like, if I wanted an application that's a CLI application that just prints hello world on the console, I can go to their Python. Now I have to go install the Python interpreter, right? But it was really quick for me to change that app and hit Python Go, and it just works, right? Same goes for Dart. Like there's a layer, the level of what you're doing. However, I could always get C compiler, right? Print hello world or write to the standard out and make it like 1 kilobyte or something like that in terms of like memory usage. Not even that, And it's like, but have I gained anything, right? Now, temporarily, I've gained the fact that whilst that program is running in memory, it's consuming less. But here's the problem that a lot of people don't realize. If you've got memory running on your computer and it's sitting there doing nothing, you're wasting that memory. It's not being effectively used, right? That's it. You don't want to have memory churn, which is like just you're throttling your RAM. But at the same time, if you've got usage on your computer, you've got 32 gigabytes of RAM and you're only ever using 16 gigabytes, well, you just 16 gigabytes to sit there doing nothing, right? Have that filled up with cache, and that's actually what goes on inside the kernel, inside the other things. It'll try and consume, you try and use as much memory as possible, but having it just sit there doing nothing is also pointless. Right?
So I think the trade-off that we're talking about here is the one between developer productivity and system productivity. Yeah. And Colin will remember an episode when we were working together in a bank where I'd been moving some of the things that we had running on a huge compute grid. So this was using thousands of servers. And we'd moved the code onto an implementation on a field programmable gate array. So we were kind of literally coding directly into hardware. And it was running 400 times faster than the C++ code on x86. And so notionally, we could then replace like 1,000 servers with one of these boards. However, we figured out that in order to do that, and that would have saved us like $1 million in server costs, it was going to cost us $1.5 million in expensive quant analysts to program field programmable gate arrays in low-level hardware description languages. And so that project did not go ahead.
Although it would have been fun.
Yeah, well, I mean, we had a little bit of fun getting to that point. But I think what we're kind of generally talking about here is trade-offs between making things easy to develop and making things have a low footprint on the hardware that we're using. And so that's just where Dart has landed in that particular part of the trade-off.
And I think, as we were saying earlier, if Dart transitions to be more of the MCU level, then yeah, you're talking about a lot less memory consumption. It's a different beast at that point, to be honest.
Well, and another question there is that overhead a static overhead, or is it a kind of multiplier effect? So, is it 7.5 times more memory, or is it just a constant, 15 megs more memory? In which case, you might be able to swallow it.
But this is exactly
what we've seen definitely is like we've got thousands of lines of code, and we add another 100 lines of code, another 1,000 lines of code, the binary doesn't get any bigger. I mean, it gets very, very smallly bigger. I mean, I don't know what the size of a Docker image at the moment is, Chris, but I mean,
so for
it's
x86,
probably
it's around 6 megs.
6 meg, and that's a lot of code. Just a lot of code.
We were doing this before. It's like this normally not just the binary shipment size of your thing. There's that static overhead of the runtime or the VM, but also the notion of when it runs in memory, it loads that into memory. So you've got that consumption of, let's say, as you said, the questioner here says like 15, 20 meg, maybe 12 meg of that is that runtime environment, but it doesn't grow. Like if you code twice as much or you do twice as much, it doesn't just magically double, like, because I printed 2 hello world strings, I don't get double the amount of memory being consumed, right?
Yep.
So this is like a fixed sort of bottom line.
It's the price you pay.
And something just on this point, use the dev tools. Use the dev tools. You will go see your memory footprint. You can see how your memory is being used. That will tell you if you have memory leak. Just because you've got garbage collected language does not mean you don't have memory leaks. It's the way you use those objects and the way that you manage using those objects that can make all the difference.
Yeah.
All right. Last question. Let's get to the last question. And it's one for Randall. Okay. Go on then, Randall.
Great.
With RiverPod,
Great.
I'll read it. With RiverPod, how would you update a change notifier and notify its listeners of the update with a stream provider?
Yeah, this is people. You keep trying to go upstream. This is the weird part. I keep seeing this over and over again. People are so used to not having available to them the notion of reactive programming, where A depends on B, B depends on C. So the way to get C to change is that A changes. And I think part of this question sort of involves that, but it's like updating a change notifier. So is that like B then, and then A is the stream provider? If that's the case, I think that's the case. Okay. So in that case, but I don't just use a raw change notifier. I'm using a notifier now because the legacy RiverPod providers are now discouraged. So if you're still using a RiverPod provider that has ref, arrow, sum function, you're using legacy. Please stop using those.
RiverPod
and
1 and RiverPod 2.
RiverPod, yeah, we're on RiverPod 2, almost 3. I hate to say this, but there's going to be a 3 probably in another, I don't know, depending how fast Remy types, probably another month or two. But so you want to be on that, and those all have, instead of the create callback, they actually have something called build, and it's a whole different structure. It works so much better. But even having said all that, so go read up on that because that's important to get. You should be using notifier, async notifier, stream notifier, and then the same 3 things with provider added to the end of it. If you're not using one of those 6 things, you're still using legacy, so you should get moving forward. A lot of advantages to that. Too long to fit in this call here, but anyway, so what you'll have though in this situation is you'll have a ref watch in your change notifier based provider on the stream provider. And what that'll mean is as the stream is updating, it will be sending out notifies, and the other provider can go, oh, I need to be updated because one of my dependencies changed. So that's how to do this kind of a structure where you've got the one depending on the other.
Yeah, and then the change notifier makes a change, and then it notifies its clients, and it trickles down.
Right, exactly. It keeps dribbling down that way, right? But really, get on board with RiverPod 2. It's just so much nicer, uniform system with a lot more features, including getting notified when people start listening to you, in case that's important, and when they stop listening to you, and when you change your own value, which is great for then doing serialization, putting it out to permanent storage, things like that. It's so much better. Remy really hit this one out of the ballpark. It was so nice to look at the framework, and he did a lot of thinking to make it all work and make it all very clean. And that's why we needed RiverPod 2, is because RiverPod 1 was an interesting experiment, worked for a while, based on provider, which is also an interesting experiment. But those were experiments. Now we're getting closer to the stuff that we can really stay with, and that's solidly mature. Until the next year.
All right. I mean, that took we got some more questions came in, so that took a bit longer than I thought. So, I mean, if you guys want to demo anything, that's fine. But otherwise, we can end the stream here if you guys need to go, because that took way longer than I thought.
Let me just demo
yeah.
something that might be useful for everybody. I put together something a while ago for this radio transmitter I was talking about the other day. Let me just share my screen.
Go for it.
Share screen, share this screen. All right, so essentially we have a radio transmitter. This is basically running SNMP, very old protocol. This is a DAR program outputting this. Is picking up values. You can see the values of the radio transmitter in a JSON, and it's pinging that every second. And this is actually up on a mountain somewhere in California. So there's a DAR program running on a mountain on a Raspberry Pi, and it's sending out this JSON object over our protocol. And if I run a app, so this is a Flutter app. This is running on my desktop. I can see that real-time data coming through to my app. And essentially what this looks like is, I just go back. Essentially, I select which ad sign I want to listen to the data from, hit go. It will subscribe to that data stream from the mountain, and it will come up in real time on there. So that's real-time data from a radio transmitter, which is SNMP, being displayed on a Flutter app. But not everybody's got the Flutter app, right? So wouldn't it be really cool if you could get that Flutter app to compile to JavaScript and run in a browser? That'd be pretty cool. So here's a browser, same app.
Nice.
The catch is that @sign technology does not run inside a browser because there's nowhere safe to put the keys. So what this actually does is the code itself says, oh, hang about, I'm running in a browser. I actually cannot speak directly to @sign because I've got no keys. So it actually speaks directly to a WebSocket, and there's another process running on this machine. Let's just go out of here and attach to number 1. You'll see there's the WebSocket, and that's my connection that's just come in, talking to the WebSocket, and I'm getting this information now over the WebSocket. So same code, exactly the same code base, but running inside a web browser, which is pretty good. So if I bring down a web browser, wouldn't it be cool if I could embed that? That would be pretty cool. So we have actually an app, a Flutter app in the web store called Wavy, and you can create Wavy pages. So you use the Wavy app to create a Wavy page. This is the Wavy page for the radio station, KRYZ radio station. It's their transmitter. And if you scroll down, you'll see, hey, it's the same code running embedded inside a web page, and it's getting real-time stats. So that's pretty cool. So you can see whether the radio transmitter is transmitting and doing all that good stuff inside a web page. But what it doesn't give you is a live data. It doesn't give you historical data about the. So wouldn't it be cool if you could get that data stream and then turn it into some historical data? So we actually mentioned this earlier. If you can get that data stream and then turn it into another protocol that you could pump into something for historical data, that would be cool. So that's what we do. There's another DAR program. All this stuff is open source. So if you go to KRYZ demo.atsign.com, you'll get one of these. And this is still the same live stream data. This is coming over MQTT from that Dart receiver, and it's pumping it into, this is the real-time last 15 minutes. We can actually look at the last, and then let's look at the last day worth of data. And then you've got time series data. You can see the time series data of where things were along the time. So this is what's known as an IoT hub that's being fed by MQTT. This is getting fed by WebSockets, and this is getting fed by WebSockets. It's a web page, and this is a Flutter app. The last thing I'll show you, just to complete the whole circle of life, is I'll show it running on a phone, just because that's sort of fun as well. So let me just get that up in a minute.
While Colin's doing that, it's worth mentioning that if people like the look of the gauges, then they're an open source project on our organization as well.
Yeah, we love
They're
them.
published on Pub. They're published on Pub, aren't they?
They are
They are. So here's my mobile phone,
at gauges.
and you can look at my mobile phone. Here's the Nortel app. You can see I've actually got a nice icon, and there's Visual 61, and this is exactly the same code but running on my mobile phone as well. So you got 3 flavors there. This is a mobile phone, this is a web page, and this is a Windows app, all getting the same data from the same place. So this is, you can imagine sort of what you can do. I don't know what that is. That's sort of interesting. Chase a mouse. Anybody want to chase a mouse? Alrighty. So yeah, I'll end the demo.
Oh, we lost him. He
I
ended
think they
himself.
pressed the leave studio button instead of the stop sharing button.
Oh well, never mind. Thank you for joining us. And there's a Randall. Oh, well.
That's one way to leave the stream.
That's
To
one way
leave
to-
So it's a
sharing.
mic drop at the end.
Sharing totally gone. I'm running out of the studio right now. I'm stopping my sharing. No more sharing.
All right.
Okay.
I have to say it's been really great having you on the show, Chris, and
Yeah.
and for Colin as well. It's here. Hang on.
Oh.
There we go.
All the buttons.
Thank you, brother. I hit the leave studio, not the stop.
Yeah,
presenter.
we thought that. Don't worry.
I'm sure you're going to giggle about that. Yeah, it was.
We
the
made
pressure of
a
trying to
bunch
do
of
demo
jokes.
live.
Yes. Yeah. We made a bunch
Anyway.
of jokes about it. Yes. You have to watch
Yeah,
stream later and see
you-
what
you
we
should.
said. Yes. Yeah. Definitely.
I was saying, thank you for joining us. It's really
Yeah.
great having you guys on the show, and I think like delving into the IoT stuff is really interesting. I think a lot of people find this kind of stuff fascinating. A lot of developers as well. So, and we'll mention that just at the end of the show. Yeah, check out @sign.com, right? And what you guys are doing. Yeah, we'll see where we go. But,
Thanks for having us. Sir.
anything you'd like to add?
Flutter Fridays. Watch out for Flutter Fridays. Come
Oh
join
yeah,
us.
Flutter Fridays. Yes, check out Flutter
You'll
Fridays.
see me there. You'll see me
Yeah.
there.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us, and we'll see you again same time next week. 160 something hours. There you go. Bye.
166. Bye.
That's the one.
Here you go.